Hi, today we will talk about the Aztec language. Nahuatl, or the Aztec language, also known as Nahuatl or Mexicano, means in Nahuatl something that sounds good or pleasing to the ear. Nahuatl forms part of the Uto-Aztecan language group and was the language spoken by the ancient Mexica, which were a tribe that inhabited parts of Mexico between 1300 and 1521, and it was also spoken by their intellectual and cultural predecessors, the Toltecs. The Aztecs esteemed the Toltec culture so much that the Nahuatl word for skilled artists is Toltecatl or Tolteca, and the word Toltecayotl means culture, civilization, and urbanism. Their capital center of Toyan, or Tula, was thought to be ruled by Quetzalcoatl, the feather serpent deity, who was then exiled to other places in Mesoamerica. Many Mesoamerican civilizations, including the Aztec and Maya, often like to make claims that their elite ruling dynasties were founded by this godlike mythical figure. Nahuatl is an American indigenous language currently spoken today by approximately 2 million people, mainly in rural areas in Mexico, Mexico City, the states of Durango, Guerrero, Michoacán, Morelos, Oaxaca, San Luis Potosí, Tabasco, Tlaxcala, and Veracruz, as well as by migrants in the U.S. While Nahuatl has many different dialects, approximately 30, some which are now extinct, the largest dialect with over 1 million speakers is the Huastecan variety, spoken in the states of Hidalgo, Veracruz, and San Luis Potosí. This is the dialect that we will focus on in this class. Even though Nahuatl is recognized as an official Mexican language, along with 63 other native Mexican languages, all contemporary Nahuatl variants have to different degrees been influenced by the Spanish language. That said, many Nahuatl words have also been incorporated into the Spanish language, and many towns and place names still retain their Aztec names. For example, a famous tourist spot in Mexico, Chapultepec Park. Chapultepec means Grasshopper Hill, which is shown here in this codex. Also, some Aztec words have been absorbed into different languages. For example, in English, the word for avocado comes from aguacatl, chili from chili, chocolate from chocolatl, tomato from xitomatl, and coyote from coyotl. Now I'm going to talk about Aztec origins or migration stories. The Aztecs or Mexica are thought to have originated from the Chichimeca, meaning the people from the milky area or the suckling place. Chichimeca was also a term used to denote barbarian nomadic tribes or people that came from the north of Mexico. These people were thought to inhabit the sacred ancestral site of Chicomostoc, meaning the 7 sacred caves, here depicted in an Aztec codex. The Aztecs were also thought to have come from the mythical place of Aztlan, meaning the place of herons, egrets, place of whiteness. People from Aztlan were called Azteca. This place is thought to be located somewhere in the southwest of the U.S. And the Aztecs tell us through their Codices that they migrated from Aztlan. They were called Azteca. And they migrated sometime around 1064, the Common Era, all the way to the Central Valley of Mexico. And they decided to settle in the middle of an island in the Lake of Texcoco, because that is the place their patron leader told them to go to, and so they did. and they began subjugating their neighboring tribes. Here there's an image from a codex showing the Aztecs departing from Aztlan, being beckoned through speech scrolls by their patron of warfare, their god, Huitzilopochtli, which means hummingbird to the left or hummingbird to the south. There, they established their city of Tenochtitlan, meaning on the cactus of the stone. Tenochtitlan was established roughly around 1325. It was the largest city-state in the pre-Columbian Americas, with approximately 400,000 inhabitants. Today, its ruins are found underneath the historic center of Mexico City. Here's an image from the frontispiece of the Codex Mendoza of how the Aztecs established their capital. Within 3 centuries, the Aztec established a massive empire, with Tenochtitlan as their capital city. They became known as the Triple Alliance, or Excan Tlahtoloyan, from 1428 until their demise in 1521. The Triple Alliance was a 3 city-state alliance they established between Tenochtitlan and the towns of Texcoco and Tlacopan, which you can see their glyphs being depicted here, and also their location relative to the lake of Texcoco. The Triple Alliance extended all the way from central Mexico up to parts of Central America, including parts of Guatemala and El Salvador today. And Nahuatl became the lingua franca, that is the commonly spoken tongue, and thus became a language of prestige amongst indigenous merchants and elites in various places in Mesoamerica, and even amongst their rivals, the Maya. So we can see the Aztec Empire depicted here in either a peachy or orangey color. Before the arrival of the Europeans, though, that is, before the arrival of Cortes to Mexico City in 1519, Nahuatl was transmitted orally. It was a spoken language. But important religious, historical, cosmic, natural events, political events, these were recorded through material through material culture. For the Aztecs, material culture acted as snapshots or markers of time. For example, they built monuments, pyramids, sculptures, textiles, and also had glyphs and pictograms. Much information was also recorded in amoxtli, books or codices. Amoxtli were pictorial manuscripts created by specialized painter scribes, tlaquilo or tlaquiloque, and these amoxtli or books were housed in various libraries called amoxcali, meaning literally book houses. Here we have an example, the Codex Borgia. We will talk more about codices later in this course. These amoxtli or specialized books did not contain alphabetic writing in the European sense, that is, Latin alphabet, but did preserve Aztec history through the use of glyphs and pictograms. Think of emojis. These Aztec amoxtli could only be read or performed by the tlaquilos who made them, specialized priests, and the ruling noble class, known as pipiltin, who were trained to read these abstract glyphs and pictograms. And therefore, these were not accessible to everyday Aztec commoners, masehualtin. Notice in the images below the representation of a female and a male tlaquilo. Visually, the act of writing, painting, they didn't see a distinction between these two events, is represented as red and black ink. And in the language, the expression intlili, intlapali, the black ink, the red ink, represents a metaphor for writing, painting. Okay. The Nahuatl spoken today and in the past had many variants, but For the most part, people could converse with one another. The different variants are intelligible. For the Aztec, Nahuatl had an elite register that was spoken by priests and the ruling elite, the Pipiltin, and a commoner register, given that the Aztecs had a very hierarchical and stratified society. So, unfortunately, when the first wave of Europeans arrived to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1519, they misinterpreted Aztec material culture and religion and the contents of their Aztec books or amoxtli as demonic, and so proceeded to destroy their vast libraries and many cultural and sacred artifacts. Thousands of amoxtli were burned, and to this day approximately only 20 pre-Hispanic Codices or books have survived. To put it into perspective, think of the terrible loss of knowledge preserved in these books, maybe comparable to the fires of the Great Library of Alexandria. So, despite being conquered by the Spanish Empire, Nahuatl, the Aztec language, has survived and persisted, and it did persist during colonial time for different reasons. The second wave of Spanish priests that arrived and some colonial administrators that arrived bemoaned the loss of the Aztec books. Not so much the loss of their demonic content, but because they felt important information about Aztec religious practices and riches had been lost. This information could have been used to help them identify it and root out undesired demonic practices and rituals that still persisted. And it would also help them, or will help them, to get a sense of what natural resources and tributes they could extract from the people they had just colonized. Because of this, a large corpus or body of Aztec literature was produced during the colonial time period. That is between the 1530s until the 1900s. Spanish priests were entrusted to work with Aztec elders or survivors of the traumatic conquest, and also with the male children of the Aztec elite, whom the priests taught at schools for indigenous children with the aim to teach them Spanish culture and Christian religion. For example, they established the first school of translators and interpreters in the Americas for the indigenous male children of the Aztec elite. We will talk more about this later, but this college was called the Imperial College of Santa Cruz de Tlatelolco. The priests recorded oral spoken Nahuatl into frozen, alphabetically written text, and they translated Aztec words and concepts into Spanish and European categories of knowledge. Here's an image of sort of this process of interpretation and translation that occurred. Thus, many Aztec Spanish works of cross-cultural translation were created. Grammars, dictionaries, cultural compendiums, religious works. One of the first and most important was the first Aztec Spanish language dictionary called the Vocabulario en Lengua Castellana y Mexicana, written by Franciscan Friar Alonso de Molina, published in 1555, and then reissued in 1571. Also, during the colonial time period, many mundane or official documents were also written in Nahuatl for administrative and legal purposes. For example, wills, household census, marriage petitions, land claims, orders, municipal council letters, you name it. Furthermore, many indigenous and mestizo, meaning half indigenous, half Spanish, intellectuals during the colonial time period also wrote either in Nahuatl or in Spanish many historical chronicles in order to promote their family heritage or their hometown's prestige. So, long story short, what has been termed today classical Nahuatl or classical Aztec language It refers to the older Nahuatl, and a lot of people really prefer to call it not classical, but colonial Nahuatl. It must be noted that this older Nahuatl represents not a record of spoken language, but it is a written corpus that was created before the 20th century. The reason it was called, or is called, classical Nahuatl is ideological. In the 1960s, one of the most prominent Mexican scholars of Aztec language and literature, Miguel León Portilla, wanted to promote Nahuatl as a prestigious indigenous Mexican language, in order to say to Western academia that Mexico too had its own civilized classical roots, just like Europeans like to claim their roots in ancient Latin and Greek. So, while the spelling of modern Nahuatl dialects is dictated by the Mexican Federal Education Ministry, the SEP, there is actually no consensus on a standardized form of spelling it. This is why if you encounter a different Nahuatl dialect, the spelling might differ. And so, if you do encounter any terms, I always urge you to just keep an open mind. And I'll just give you one example. In English, the term for something good or done well can be called quali, and it's pronounced in all these different ways. Quali, quali, and quali. It sounds the same. They might be spelled differently, but they are pronounced the same. So if you're looking up a term in a dictionary, or if you're reading a manuscript from different dialects, be prepared to just read it out loud to get a sense of what you're looking for. Well, that's it. I hope you learned something about the Nahuatl language, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.